Sometimes, the most revealing moments about human character happen in the most unexpected places, like a luxury car dealership on any given Tuesday afternoon. It was 3 o'clock on a sunny Tuesday afternoon in Palo Alto, and the Tesla showroom on University Avenue gleamed under the California light like a modern cathedral dedicated to automotive innovation. Can you sense that there's something hypnotic about a Tesla showroom? The elegant lines of the cars, the smell of new leather mixed with cutting-edge technology, the silent promise that the future has already arrived. The environment was meticulously designed to impress. Polished marble floors that reflected the LED lights, cars positioned like precious sculptures, and an atmosphere that discreetly whispered about exclusivity and status. For the regular clientele, Silicon Valley executives, tech entrepreneurs, and local celebrities, this was a familiar temple of high-end consumption. Steph Curry pushed through the glass doors of the dealership wearing a faded gray Warriors hoodie, jeans with a small tear at the knee, and running shoes that had seen better days. His hair was hidden under a simple cap, and he carried only a basic black backpack. To any casual observer, he looked exactly like what he was, a 35-year-old family man enjoying a free afternoon. It's impossible not to feel how appearances can be deceiving, especially in environments where visual judgment happens in fractions of a second. On the other side of the showroom, Brad Mitchell adjusted his Italian silk tie for the 5th time and checked his Rolex, a graduation gift he was still paying off in installments. At 28 years old, Brad had transformed his job at Tesla into an extension of his own quest for social status. Every sale was validation. Every wealthy client was a potential connection to the world he desperately wanted to join. Brad watched Steph enter and immediately activated his internal client qualification, radar. Old hoodie, worn sneakers, casual posture. All the signs that, in his limited experience, indicated someone who was just looking, or, worse yet, a curious onlooker without real purchasing power. "Can I help you?" Brad asked, approaching with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and a tone that suggested professional obligation rather than genuine interest. "Hi," Steph responded, with that natural cordiality that characterized all his interactions. "I'm interested in the Tesla Roadster. Could I take a look?" Brad blinked, as if he was certain he had heard wrong. The Roadster was Tesla's top-of-the-line model, with a starting price of $250,000. It was the type of car the dealership sold maybe once a month, always to clients who arrived in other luxury cars or with personal assistants. How often do we judge someone's worth by their external packaging, completely ignoring the actual content? "The Roadster?" Brad repeated, his voice carrying poorly, disguised incredulity. "Are you sure? It's a very specific car." Steph nodded patiently. "Yes, I'm interested. It's for a special gift." Brad discreetly looked around the showroom, noticing there were more promising customers waiting for service. A well-dressed, middle-aged couple examining a Model S, and a young executive in a suit who clearly belonged to the ideal Tesla profile. "Look," Brad said, trying to sound helpful, "the Roadster is really our premium model. Maybe you'd like to take a look at the more accessible models? We have some very good options in the Model 3 line." What's most striking is how some people confuse helpfulness with condescension, without realizing they're revealing more about themselves than about whom they're judging. Steph maintained his friendly expression, but something in his eyes suggested he was accustomed to this type of treatment. "Actually, I'm quite interested specifically in the Roadster. Could you show me?" Brad sighed internally, time wasted with a client who obviously couldn't afford it, while real sales awaited his attention. But protocol was protocol. "Sure," he said, vaguely gesturing toward the red roadster positioned in the center of the showroom. "That one there is our display model." They walked to the car, and Steph approached with the genuine admiration of someone who truly appreciated quality engineering. He gently ran his hand over the impeccable bodywork, examined the interior details, and asked technical questions about range, acceleration, and safety features. Brad responded mechanically, his interest diminishing with each question. It was obvious the guy had done online research, but research didn't pay for $250,000 cars. "It's really impressive," Steph said, his voice loaded with genuine admiration. "My wife will love it." It was at that moment that Brad's forced patience finally ran out. He looked at Steph, really looked, seeing only the faded hoodie, the worn sneakers, the absence of any visual indicator of wealth. "Buddy," Brad said, his voice taking on a tone that mixed condescension with what he believed was useful realism. "I'm going to be straight with you, okay? This car costs $250,000. You can't afford this model." The words echoed through the silent showroom like a sentence pronounced in court. Other customers looked discreetly in their direction, and Steph remained motionless for a moment, processing not so much the words, but the attitude behind them. "How about," Brad continued, genuinely believing he was being helpful, "taking a look at the used cars outside? Or I can show you our financing line for more affordable models." The silence that followed was charged with a tension that only moments of precipitous judgment can create. Steph looked at Brad, then at the roadster, then again at the young salesman who had just committed the most expensive mistake of his career. And in that moment, in a Tesla dealership, in Palo Alto, a lesson about never judging a book by its cover was about to be taught in a way that would forever change the perspective of everyone present. There are moments in life when our true nature is revealed not by what we achieve, but by how we treat those we believe are beneath us. Steph Curry remained silent for a few seconds after Brad's brutal declaration, as if he were processing not just the words, but the entire attitude behind them. Can you perceive that truly confident people rarely feel compelled to prove their worth to strangers who underestimate them? Instead of taking offense or reacting defensively, Steph simply smiled with that serenity that comes from someone who knows exactly who he is. "I understand your concern," Steph said calmly, "but I'm really interested in seeing the car. Could you show me the interior and talk about the technical specifications?" Brad sighed, clearly irritated at having to continue wasting time with this persistent dreamer. He opened the roadster's door with the forced delicacy of someone doing a costly favor. "Look, it's an incredible car," Brad said, his voice loaded with poorly disguised impatience. "But I'll be honest with you, the monthly payment, even with extended financing, would be more than most people earn per month. We're talking about something between $4,000 and $5,000 monthly." It's impossible not to feel how condescension can be more insulting than direct rudeness. Meanwhile, on the other side of the showroom, Brad noticed that David Rodriguez, the senior sales manager, was attending to an elegantly dressed couple interested in a Model S Plaid. The difference in treatment was glaring. David offered espresso, explained every detail with genuine enthusiasm, and clearly treated those clients like automotive royalty. "Coffee, Mr. Patterson?" David asked solicitously to the man in the suit. "And would the lady like to sit while I explain the customization options?" Brad watched the interaction with poorly disguised envy. Those were the clients he wanted to serve. People who obviously belonged in that environment, who wore expensive watches and talked about cars as casual investments. Brad's mind wandered to his own story, a narrative of ambition and insecurity that he rarely allowed to surface. Son of an accountant and a high school teacher in Fresno, Brad had grown up on the periphery of the American middle class, comfortable enough to dream of wealth, but not rich, enough to achieve it easily. How often does our need to belong make us forget our basic humanity? During college, Brad had watched classmates from wealthy families buy cars that cost more than his parents' annual income. That disparity had planted in him a seed of resentment that grew until it became an obsession with status symbols. Working at Tesla wasn't just a job, it was his chance to be close to the world he had always admired from afar. About acceleration, Steph interrupted Brad's reveries. What's the 0 to 60 time? 2.1 seconds, Brad responded automatically, then added with sarcasm, Of course, you'd need a private track to really test that, since it's not exactly legal on the streets. Steph nodded, completely ignoring the condescending tone. And the range? How many miles on a full charge? About 600 miles, Brad responded, his irritation growing. But again, we're talking about a very serious investment here. It's not like buying a Honda Civic. What's most striking is how some people confuse technical knowledge with personal arrogance. It was at that moment that a new customer entered the dealership, a young tech entrepreneur wearing designer jeans and a t-shirt from a startup that had been sold for billions. Brad immediately noticed the Apple Watch edition, the $800 Golden Goose sneakers, and the casual presence that screamed, Silicon Valley new money. Excuse me, Brad said to Steph, his attention already shifting. I need to greet another customer. You can keep looking. He walked away toward the entrepreneur, leaving Steph alone with the roadster. The change in his posture and tone was immediate and obvious, from irritated condescending to charming salesman in a matter of seconds. Welcome to Tesla, Brad said to the newcomer, his voice now warm and solicitous. My name is Brad. How can I help you today? Steph observed the transformation with a mixture of sadness and understanding. He had faced this type of treatment before, not just as Steph Curry, but as a black man in predominantly white and wealthy spaces. The difference was that now he had resources to deal with it in ways that could be educational. 15 minutes passed while Brad conducted an enthusiastic presentation for the entrepreneur, offering test drives, explaining VIP programs, and essentially doing everything he had refused to do for Steph. When he finally returned, Steph was carefully examining the Tao Roadster's digital dashboard, making mental notes about every specification. Still here? Brad asked, his irritation now less disguised. Look, I'm going to be direct with you because you seem like good people. This car costs a house, an entire house. You need to be realistic about your options. He vaguely gestured toward the used car area. We have some 2019 Model 3s over there that would be much more appropriate for your budget. The words fell into the air like stones, thrown into still water, creating waves of embarrassment that spread through the nearby area. Other customers began to look discreetly, some clearly uncomfortable with the obvious rudeness they were witnessing. Steph took a deep breath, maintaining that serenity that only people truly secure in themselves can maintain when they are underestimated. He looked at Brad for a long moment, as if he were making an important decision. Brad, Steph said finally, his voice calm but loaded with a natural authority that made the salesman pay attention for the first time. Can I ask you something? Sure, Brad responded, slightly disconcerted by the confident tone. Do you judge all your customers by the clothes they wear, or am I special? The question echoed through the showroom with surgical precision that cut through all pretense and revealed the naked truth of the situation. And it was at that moment that Brad realized that maybe just maybe, he had made a very, very big mistake. There are moments in life when reality hits us like an emotional tsunami, and we discover that our judgment was not only wrong, but spectacularly, irrevocably wrong. Steph's question echoed through the Tesla showroom like a sincerity bomb that silenced nearby conversations and made heads turn discreetly. Brad was paralyzed for a few seconds, his mouth slightly open, as if he were processing not just the words, but the natural authority with which they were pronounced. Can you perceive that there are moments when a simple question exposes truths we preferred to keep hidden? I don't judge anyone, Brad stammered, his arrogant confidence evaporating like water in the California desert. It's just that, well, this is a very expensive car and you assumed I can't afford it based on what, exactly? Steph interrupted gently, but with a firmness that made Brad swallow hard. It was at that moment of growing tension that Jennifer Walsh, a 42-year-old technology executive who was examining a Model Y on the other side of the showroom, looked more closely at the man in the hoodie who was questioning the salesman. Something about his voice, the confident posture, the way he carried his head. "My God," she whispered to her husband, "that's Steph Curry." The words were said quietly, but in the tense silence that had settled over the showroom, they spread like sound waves on a calm lake. Jennifer's husband looked more closely, adjusted his glasses, and his eyes widened, with recognition. "It's really him," he confirmed quietly. "It's Steph Curry, the Warriors player." The information began to spread through the discreet whispers that characterize moments of recognition in public spaces. "It's Steph Curry, the basketball player, the Warriors guy." Each whisper was like a drop added to a dam that was about to overflow over Brad's head. It's impossible not to feel when we're about to witness the exact moment someone realizes they've made the most expensive mistake of their life. David Rodriguez, the senior sales manager who was finalizing the Patterson couple's sale, caught the whispers and looked casually in the direction everyone was watching. When his eyes focused on the man in the hoodie that Brad was treating with disdain, his face immediately paled. David had worked in the luxury automotive world for 15 years. He knew how to recognize celebrities, especially local Bay Area celebrities. And Steph Curry wasn't just a local celebrity. He was practically royalty in San Francisco. "Oh no," David murmured to himself, immediately leaving the Patterson couple and walking quickly toward Brad and Steph. Brad still hadn't noticed the change in atmosphere around him. He was too focused on his own irritation and the strange confidence Steph displayed to notice the looks and whispers. "Look," Brad continued, trying to regain control of the situation, "it's not personal, okay? It's just that I've worked in sales for years, and I've developed a good instinct for knowing when someone is a serious buyer or just—" "Brad!" David interrupted abruptly, arriving beside them with an expression of poorly disguised panic. "Can I talk to you for a second?" "I'm busy with a customer," Brad responded, irritated by the interruption. "Exactly," David said, his voice loaded with an urgency that finally made Brad pay attention. "Brad, do you know who this customer is?" Brad looked confusedly between David and Steph, finally beginning to realize that something was wrong, very wrong. "Sir," David turned to Steph with a professional smile that couldn't completely hide his panic. "I'm David Rodriguez, sales manager. May I ask your name?" Steph smiled with that genuine cordiality that characterized all his public interactions. "Steph Curry. And you don't need to worry. Brad was just explaining to me how I can't afford a roadster." What's most striking is how truth, when finally revealed, can transform an embarrassing situation into something completely devastating. David closed his eyes for a second, as if he were praying this was a nightmare. When he opened them, reality was still there, implacable, and financially catastrophic. "Mr. Curry," David said, his voice trembling slightly, "I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. Brad is new here and—" "Wait," Brad interrupted, the penny finally dropping like a ton of bricks. "Steph Curry? The basketball player?" "The same," Steph confirmed calmly. Brad felt the world spinning around him. Steph Curry, the man who earned more than $40 million a year, the face of multi-billion-dollar brands, one of the richest and most famous people in the Bay Area. And he had spent the last hour treating him like an unemployed person who couldn't afford a used car. I didn't," Brad stammered, his arrogant confidence disappearing like smoke in the wind. "Didn't know," Steph completed gently. "And you know something? That should be a relief. Because it means you treat all customers this way, not just people you recognize as rich." The observation was pronounced without malice, but carried a weight that made Brad realize the magnitude of his behavior. "Mr. Curry," David intervened desperately, "how can I compensate for this? What can I do to correct this situation?" Steph looked around the showroom, noticing that he now had the attention of practically everyone present. Some customers had discreetly taken out cell phones and were recording, realizing they were witnessing something that would probably go viral. "Actually," Steph said, his voice gaining a thoughtful tone, "I'm interested in making a very specific purchase today." David and Brad leaned forward, as if their careers depended on the next sentence. "I don't want just one roadster," Steph continued calmly. "I want 5 Tesla cars, a roadster for my wife, a Model S for my parents, a Model X for my sister, and 2 Model Ys for my brothers-in-law." The silence that followed was so profound you could hear the air conditioning humming. David quickly calculated mentally. He was looking at a sale of approximately $1,200,000. "But beyond that," Steph continued, "I'm interested in establishing a partnership between Tesla and my foundation to donate 100 Model 3 cars to UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital employees. We're talking about a 3-year program, renewable." David's mental calculator almost caught fire. 100 Model 3 cars, even with institutional discount, represented at least $4 million in sales. It was the type of partnership that could define a manager's career. Brad was speechless, finally understanding that he hadn't just lost a sale, he had lost the biggest opportunity of his professional life. "And you know what's the interesting part?" Steph said, looking directly at Brad. "I was planning to do all this today. I came here specifically because I heard good things about this dealership." He paused, letting the words settle like molten lead. "But now I have a simple question. Do you think I should buy cars at a place where I'm not respected?" And at that moment, in a Tesla dealership in Palo Alto, the future of several careers was depending on the answer to a question that should never have needed to be asked. Some moments in life give us the opportunity to choose between revenge and redemption. And sometimes, the most powerful choice is the one that transforms not just who was wrong, but everyone who witnesses. The silence in the Tesla showroom was so dense it seemed to have physical substance. David was visibly sweating, Brad seemed to have lost all color from his face, and the other customers watched in respectful silence, like spectators of a drama they knew would become legend. Can you perceive that there are moments when the fate of several people depends on one person's response? Steph Curry looked around the showroom, noticing the cell phone cameras discreetly pointed in his direction, the anxious expressions of the employees, and especially the genuine desperation in Brad's eyes. It was one of those moments that would define not just careers, but characters. "You know what?" Steph said finally, his voice loaded with wisdom that came from years dealing with difficult situations. "I'm going to make the purchase right here." David almost collapsed with relief, but Steph raised his hand before he could start thanking him. "But I have some conditions." The tension returned to the environment like a compressed spring. "First condition," Steph continued, looking directly at Brad, "you're going to process the entire sale. Every car, every paper, every detail. This is your commission, Brad." Brad looked at Steph with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Mr. Curry, I don't deserve—" "You're right," Steph interrupted gently. "You don't deserve it. But everyone deserves a second chance to do the right thing. It's impossible not to feel when we witness grace in action, the moment when someone chooses to elevate instead of destroy." "Second condition," Steph continued, "you're going to personally deliver each of these 5 cars. Not a delivery employee, not a subcontractor, you. And when you deliver each car, you're going to explain to each person in my family why you initially judged that I couldn't afford them." The weight of the condition settled on Brad like a custom-made humility lesson. He would have to look into the eyes of Steph Curry's wife, parents, siblings, and admit that he had misjudged the man they loved. "Third condition," Steph said, his voice gaining a solemnity that made everyone lean forward. "You're going to accompany me on the first car delivery to the hospital. You're going to meet the doctors and nurses who work 16 hours straight, saving children's lives. You're going to see what they currently drive, how they live, and understand that human value has nothing to do with bank accounts." Brad nodded vigorously, tears beginning to form in his eyes. The magnitude of the lesson he was receiving was both devastating and transformative. "And the fourth condition," Steph said, making a dramatic pause, "is that you never again judge a customer by their appearance. Because the next person in a hoodie who walks in here might be a tech billionaire, a famous artist, or simply an honest worker who saved for years to fulfill a dream. What's most striking is how a true lesson doesn't humiliate to destroy, but to rebuild something better." David finally found his voice. "Mr. Curry, this is incredibly generous of you." "It's not generosity," Steph corrected. "It's investment. I'm investing in the possibility that Brad becomes the type of salesman who treats every customer like a human being worthy of respect." He turned to Brad, who was now crying openly, not from shame, but from a gratitude so deep it seemed to remodel his soul in real time. "Brad," Steph said softly, "what's the lesson here?" Brad wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and found his voice. That a person's character isn't measured by the clothes they wear or the car they drive. It's measured by how they treat people they believe can't do anything for them." "Exactly," Steph confirmed. "And now you're going to have the chance to prove you learned that lesson." The next 40 minutes were a master class in commercial transaction conducted with mutual dignity. Brad processed the purchase of the U8's 5 cars with meticulous attention that contrasted dramatically with his initial attitude. Every question Steph asked was answered with respect and detailed information. When they got to the details of the hospital partnership, Brad took careful notes, asked intelligent questions about logistics, and demonstrated genuine interest in understanding how that program would impact real lives. Jennifer Walsh, the executive who had first recognized Steph, approached discreetly while the paperwork was being finalized. "Mr. Curry," she said respectfully, "may I say that watching this was inspiring. The way you handled this situation will stay with me forever." Steph smiled. "The true measure of character isn't how we react when we're respected, but how we respond when we're disrespected." She nodded and discreetly showed her phone. "I hope you don't mind, but I posted about this on LinkedIn. The story already has thousands of shares." And so the viralization began. What had started as an embarrassing interaction in a dealership transformed into a viral lesson about respect, second chances, and the importance of treating every person with dignity. 3 weeks later, Brad Mitchell had become a legend at the Palo Alto Tesla, but not for the reasons he had originally desired. He was known as the salesman who had learned the most important customer service lesson in the most public way possible. The delivery of cars to the Curry family was a transformative experience. At each house, Brad had to tell his story, admit his mistake, and thank for the second chance. Isha Curry hugged him after hearing his confession. Steph's parents invited him to dinner. Each family treated him not as the salesman who had failed, but as the man who had learned and grown. The hospital visit was even more impactful. Brad met Dr. Sarah Martinez, a pediatrician who drove a 2010 Honda Civic with 200,000 miles because she spent all extra money on educational materials for sick children. He met nurses who took buses to work because they couldn't afford cars, but still spent overtime hours without pay caring for small patients. "Now I understand," Brad said to Steph as they watched the medical team receive the first donated Tesla cars. "Real wealth isn't what you have, it's what you do with what you have." 6 months later, Brad had become the dealership's #1 salesman, not for being aggressive or manipulative, but for treating each customer with the dignity Steph had taught him. He framed a photo on his desk, him delivering the Roadster keys to Isha Curry with a simple caption, "The day I learned that character matters more than commission." The video of the initial interaction, recorded by customers and later shared with Steph's permission, went viral with more than 50 million views. But it wasn't the type of viral that humiliates or destroys. It was the type that inspires and transforms. Steph used the platform to launch a national campaign, Chandru, Respect Every Customer, encouraging companies to train employees about dignified treatment regardless of appearance or perceived status. And every week, Steph received messages from people who had changed how they treated others because of that story. Salespeople who stopped judging. Customers who began treating employees with more respect. A lesson that started in a Tesla dealership and spread throughout the world. Because in the end, true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in our capacity to see human dignity where others see only appearances. And sometimes, a second chance offered with wisdom can transform not just one person, but an entire culture.